Hello and welcome to the Monday Agenda. The Monday Agenda today is highly privileged to talk to Ms. Joyce Msuya, who is the UN Environment Deputy Executive Director and an assistant to the UN Secretary General. Joyce, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
First and foremost, maybe to congratulate you, we really have very few Tanzanians at such high positions, so congratulations, and I truly am very proud actually to have a Tanzanian at such a high level, and of course to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
We'll go straight to the interview. First, to understand United Nations Environment Program, what is the context of environment according to UNEP?
Thank you for having me. When you look at development challenges that is facing the globe, the citizens to date, we believe there is no such an absolute emergency as environment. And not just environment. I think it's important to look at environment in the context of broad development agenda. If you look at the time we are in now, there are three big environmental challenges, which all countries in the globe face, including Tanzania. One is the climate change, second is biodiversity, and third, which is sort of cross-cutting, is about sustainable production and consumption. Let's look at Africa. By 2050, 85% of the population is projected to be in the cities.
Okay.
What that means is you're going to have a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of people to move around because of job creation opportunities. So how do we, as United Nations UN Environment Program, work with governments to help prepare them? But I'm actually very excited about the timing of these challenges because, again, globally there is increased awareness and political commitment to addressing these challenges. And that's what makes it exciting.
Okay. And currently, as you've rightly mentioned, the three major issues, what are the current global threats, environmental threats, that we are looking at or we are facing at the moment?
Definitely climate is one.
Okay.
If you look at the last 5 years, they have been the hottest since 1950, according to the World Meteorological Association. If you look globally, you have 1.1 billion people at risk of some type of climate challenge. Biodiversity, 1 million out of 8 million species are at the risk of extinction.
Okay.
So these are real challenges. I mean, we are in Tanzania, we are endowed with enormous natural wealth. You think if we don't take care of climate and biodiversity, what will happen to the development gains that this country and others have made? The challenges, the depth and breadth vary from one country to another. Last year I was in Zanzibar for an official visit. The rising sea level was a clear indication of climate change in islands. If you look at mainland Tanzania, you have pockets of drought or extended cold season, again as a result of climate change. But time is running out. And what that means is we have to act, and we have to act very fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your experience in Zanzibar, and you've been around. Is it safe or unsafe to say Tanzania is at risk?
You say, what is interesting is environmental challenges don't have geographical boundaries.
Okay.
They don't need passports to cross over. So I think a more interesting question is, Tanzania clearly has made progress on certain aspects of environmental challenges. For example, under the current government and previous governments, reforestation efforts, preservation of natural resources, the initiatives have been there. The question is, are they keeping up with the fast pace of climate change? And that's why the Secretary General next month will be convening a climate action summit to reiterate that climate change is moving faster than we move, and therefore we need to enormously increase our efforts. Second, we need to bring endogenous solutions that are working for climate. For example, I grew up here in Tanzania.
Okay.
Where I come from, we used to use banana leaves instead of plastic bags to put things and move things around. Now, plastic bags brought plastic pollution, and I congratulate the government of Tanzania for banning plastic bags. So progress has been made, but the speed globally, not just Tanzania, needs to be increased.
Okay. You've mentioned, we'll come back to Tanzania, but I really wish to focus on the context of Tanzania. We'll come back to Tanzania, but you've mentioned that the Secretary General has called for a summit, which is happening next month. So can you tell us more about the summit? What's the agenda? And for me, probably talk about it as well. One of the challenges that I see in most, such campaigns, such good movements, is the fact that we do them once, we go, we meet, we talk, we rub shoulders, and we call it off. Then nothing happens until something else triggers another meeting. So tell us a bit more about this. Is it a follow-up to a certain meeting that already, I think there was the Paris summit? Mm-hmm. And what is it that is expected out of this forthcoming summit?
So I'll start off my response in two ways. Addressing climate change issues is more of a journey rather than a destination.
Absolutely.
Because countries face different types of challenges related to climate change. The capacity to respond varies from one country. You have countries that are poor, you have countries that are rich, so the speed of action would be different. But also the scale of the challenge varies. What is exciting about the Secretary General Summit is part of a journey. What do I mean by that? The Paris Agreement provides the highest political commitment around climate change. We have seen national plans to address whether it's mitigation or adaptation on climate change, including here in Tanzania. Yeah. The Secretary General Summit is going to focus on three things. One is we need to scale up our actions because climate change is a crisis. Okay. He's actually used a very nice language by saying this is a battle of our lives and our lives for our children, and it's a battle that we can win if we scale up our responses. So one is actions. Two is to bring solutions to the meeting. Mm-hmm. Mind you, it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. So to actually say in Tanzania, in other countries, what has worked in mitigating, adapting to climate change? I mentioned Zanzibar. When I was in Zanzibar, I saw mangrove trees that were actually being used to address climate issues. So bringing things that have worked that can be scaled up. Okay. Third is concretely saying this is everybody's business. It's not one person's or one government business. Why? Climate change does not have geographical boundaries. Almost all climate change issues have an impact on people, industries, policy, so everybody can play a role in climate change. And it's a continuation. Next year there will be a COP on biodiversity, which again has an impact on climate change.
Okay, so as a journey and not a destination, what measures are you putting in place to ensure that there's a follow-up to the Secretary General Summit? And where is this happening at?
It's happening in New York at the sidelines of the General Assembly.
Okay.
So all the world leaders will be there, but also ministers. Okay. You asked a very good question. How do we make this not a one-off? Yeah. One is I have full trust in the Secretary General. If you know him, one thing he does is an action-oriented leader. Two, even prior to the meetings in September, we have actually started to think about the post-summit actions. How are we going to follow up? For example, UNEP is working, co-leading a work stream on nature-based solutions. Okay. How do we use planting of trees, preserving nature to mitigate the risks of climate change? So there will be action. I am certainly expected to follow up as part of the senior leadership team on what will come out. And based on what happened after the Paris Agreement, I have full confidence that will happen.
And how would you rate or rather determine the response, the feedback, the commitment of the heads of states?
So far, the response has been very, very positive. We have had many conversations across the globe. My executive director, our team has been engaging across the globe. The summit itself has created quite a dynamic enthusiasm, but also very high expectations. So we have to deliver. But also I think we have to look at the summit as part of a package of sustainable development goals. Climate change is just one part of the story, but also it's a cross-cutting issue that affects almost all sectors of development.
You are watching the Monday Agenda, and with me on the program today is Ms. Joyce Msuya, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, and we're looking on to not only the forthcoming summit, which will take place in September, but the issues of environment in general, and that Tanzania does not stand in isolation. So if something happens globally, we're also prone to the effects of environmental changes with that scale. I wish to understand the fifth regime of Tanzania under His Excellency John Pombe Joseph Magufuli is so much pushing, and we support the notion of industrialization, transforming Tanzania into middle income state. And, it doesn't come, it's not a walk in the park. It brings a lot of challenges, environmental challenges as well, establishing plants, issues of energy, issues of infrastructure. They're all, environment related. Are there any precautions that you as United Nations would give to Tanzania towards that move, towards that drive?
Be very honest by first congratulating the government of President Magufuli for actually setting a roadmap for industrialization. I think it's fantastic. I would also want to make a point, I've had an opportunity to live in South Korea and China. And in 1967, South Korea's per capita income was exactly that of Ghana in 1967. When I was in South Korea in 2014, its per capita income was just under Singapore, 19,000 US dollars, and South Korea was a member of the wealthiest club called OECD. Okay. If you look at the development journey of South Korea as an example, industrialization was a central part of the story. Okay. That story is not uncommon just for South Korea. China, other countries have gone the same, including Europe. Mm-hmm. Why am I saying that? What I'm saying is where we are now, for example, to support President Magufuli's industrialization drive, we can actually go back and look at the lessons, good and bad, of what other countries have done when it comes to industrialization, and take the ones that are relevant, because every country is different. There's no one size fit all, and to say, what can we learn? Certainly. What does it mean for environment? For example, most industrialization drives source of energy, whether you're using coal, solar, wind, is a key part, and it can have positive or negative impact on the environment. So learning from other people's experience and learning from data, which we produce as part of our gap emissions report, for example, we can actually help to advise. At the end of the day, the government is in the driver's seat of what is working well. I think, too, it's important to note as we are leading into the fourth industrial revolution, technology, robots, artificial intelligence has provided opportunities for some of the industrialization initiatives to leapfrog out of the bad environmental practices. Okay. So that is extremely important. I am also encouraged by enormous awareness, average citizen, including here in Dar, young and old from different parts, of the environmental impact. So again, I have full trust in the government. I have full trust that we can support, if asked, on advising what has worked, what has not worked. And this is the kind of question we get from a number of countries, particularly from Africa.
Okay. The most understanding of people is that the United Nations works with the governments. But again, when it comes to issues of industrialization, when it comes to issues of, environment, you would not leave the private sector on the sideline. How do you work with the private sector to ensure that, not only that, working with the government, but ensuring that the private sector is part and parcel of the environmental drive towards achieving zero emissions?
It's a good question. UNEP is a member states organization. We have 193, Tanzania is one of them. A lot of environmental challenges. I mean, I've been following with strong interest how Tanzania went about banning usage of plastic bags. Or other countries, I live in Kenya, it's the same story. Most of the environmental issues which the government bring to us, they are aware that it takes collective actions to address them. Let's give one very simple example. The use of single-use plastics across the globe. If you want to address it, you have to look at the entire supply chain. Who produces plastic straws or plastic bags? So every aspect of the economy has a role to play. The government in formulating the policy framework and compliance, but also the government to work with the private sector to transition out of environmentally damaging practices to more. And these are the kinds of practices we see across the globe. Citizens have a role to play. Most of us in our households, we have to make a choice. Am I buying a plastic straw? Am I not buying a plastic straw? So every element of the society has an action to play at different scales, but of course guided by governments, particularly when it comes to policy framework, regulation, and compliance.
One of the activities or mandate that the UNEP undertakes is also to advise governments. And I'm wondering, is Tanzania, as part of your work, is Tanzania faring well or not so well in terms of, observing and keeping good environment practices as compared to other developing nations, other countries?
Look, I mean, I'm here, I'm going to meet with government officials from different ministries. I started off by saying environmental issues are everybody's issue because it covers agriculture sector, health, and everything. So I will be having conversations with different ministries. I'm quite encouraged by the Tanzanian government. Tomorrow I'll be joining Uongozi Institute Africa Leadership Forum that is focusing on natural resource management and climate change. That is my panel. So by all indications, the government is on the right path. The fact that these conversations are happening here is a positive thing. I tend to attend a lot of global events, almost all of them. The Tanzanian government is represented. I'm based in Nairobi. Tanzanian government has a member of a committee, permanent representative, who actually governs and contributes to our work as UNEP. So by all indications, we have very healthy and productive engagement with Tanzania, like other member states. And I look forward now that His Excellency President Magufuli is going to lead SADC to see how can we even support through that platform environmental issues.
Tanzania is highly an agricultural economy. And we've seen practices where we apply a lot of pesticides, herbicides, you name them, fertilizers, industrial fertilizers, etc. These are all not environmental friendly. Could this be a result of declining health statuses in our countries, Tanzania being one of them?
Like a fact-based narrative, I have not looked at the data of the links between in Tanzania, chemicals and health, but what we have seen globally, yes, I mean, you pour chemicals, whether it's from industrial waste or otherwise into rivers when people drink, then there are naturally health impacts. We have chemicals treaties that member states that we work with, we call them multilateral environmental agreements, for example, Minamata. and others that are addressing chemicals waste. One of our growing program now is waste management, including chemicals. How do you actually work with governments to not only deal with the waste when it's released, but also before, to prevent the generation of waste as part of the chemicals pollution. We look at circularity. For example, there are certain chemicals that can be recycled and or discarded in a very safe, environmentally friendly work. But for Tanzania, I'm not done yet with my meetings with the government officials. I will listen and also look at the data to see how we can support them.
Okay, you did mention earlier on the fact that you know, as part of agriculture, we also talk about fishing and how the fishing industry has been so populated with plastic. You did mention about 8 tons of plastic waste are found in the water bodies in a year, which again does not make our fish very safe. What's your call to that? Because Tanzania is surrounded by, you know, is one of the Great Lakes countries, the oceans around us and the seas, and we are proud of our fish, but again we're not again in isolation. The fish from the Indian Ocean could be affected and they're brought to the Tanzanian market. What's your call on that, especially on if there are issues towards, you know, either recycling plastic or not use of plastic, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm glad you raised that. You know, I would say one point to begin with. If you look globally again, when it comes to banning the use of plastic bags globally, African governments are leading. You know, I give this example. One time I was traveling in Amsterdam and I wanted to buy something to put in a plastic bag. Somebody looked at my boarding pass and say, "You're going to Nairobi, we cannot give you a plastic bag." So these policy frameworks that have been put by African governments, including Tanzania recently when it comes to plastic bags, it's also having a positive impact outside the continent. It's a positive thing to celebrate. Now, going back to the fish, again, it's about a journey rather than a destination. You know, Kenya banned the use of plastic bags before Tanzania.
Yeah.
We welcome the fact that Tanzania, since we are sharing the same ocean and the fish cross over, now we are taking that. There's a lot of work, and we are supporting, for example, of looking at the impact of plastics on marine life. We call it the Marine Litter Program. We've benefited from some contributions from the donors, so we are working with different countries along the coast to see what is the impact, but also projecting, together with WHO, on the potential environmental health nexus impact as well. So I think the fact that African leadership on plastic is absolutely evidence. I think the next step is to say, what other alternatives can we provide? What other plastic-related products as part of sustainable production and consumption need to be addressed?
Joyce Msuya is the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, and we're looking onto the issues of environment here on the Monday agenda. And, well, I wish to, again, understand, as part of the advisory role that you play to the governments, do you have a program as UNEP that prepares the future generation to become more environmental aware, to take care of the environment, so that, you know, the generation that comes after them could, you know, still find greenery on earth?
Yeah. It's a timely question. I mean, I'll give you 3 examples. You know, I'm a mother of 2 young people, so this is 2 young teenagers, and this is one area that is quite dear to my heart. One is we have a number of campaigns. You mentioned plastics. You know, one of the leading role in terms of advocacy that UNEP played was actually working with young people to raise awareness why using plastic straws or plastic bags is not good, and using the social media platform. That has worked very well. So one channel is through our campaigns for different environmental issues. The second, we have a very growing youth and education program, where within our ecosystems division, we're trying to see how can we work with universities to mainstream environmental education. Last week I was in South Korea, and I was engaging with a university to see how do we leverage our scientific content to share with the university so the young people can be trained using sound advice that comes from us. I think lastly is through our major stakeholders groups. We have NGOs, but also we have youth representatives. When we have environmental assembly, like the one we had in Nairobi in March, the youth were represented. I met with the youth group that came for this biggest governance meeting that we had, and it was a very dynamic and candid conversation. And what fascinates me is, given that this is a hashtag generation, as I call them, they really push us to think and do things differently. You know, whether it's technology-wise, social media, use of technology, and they become our biggest cheerleaders on environmental issues.
Okay, so in your opinion, do you feel, you know, with all your mighty that someday down the line we shall truly reach zero emission globally, yes?
You know, I am an eternal impatient optimist.
Okay, all right.
I have been blessed to work in very challenging environments, but I always look at a glass half full.
Okay.
If you look at whether it's environmental issue or development issues 20 years ago, we are much better off data-wise compared to 20 years ago. So I'm very optimistic. I think time is running out. The Secretary General has said climate change, for example, is moving faster than we move, and that's why this summit in New York is a way of speeding up action. I believe environmental issues are the battle, particularly climate change, that we can win. But we need to increase the speed of our action and the scale of our action. So I am optimistic. I cannot predict the future, but I am optimistic.
Excellent. And maybe to look onto, you know, I meet and talk to people, discuss with people. I met recently with the UNHCR, and we spoke about the new factors the new or existing factors that, you know, still bring refugees across nations. And I'm wondering, as far as the environment is concerned, Tanzania is one of the countries that still receives, we buy, for instance, second-hand or third-hand vehicles, you name it, and they produce a lot of carbon onto the air. And rather, I'm looking onto how UNEP can play a role in advising the government towards, you know, importation of stuff like that that could, you know, degrade the environment, the climate. What's your role on that towards ensuring that countries where we import most vehicles, at least we ban importation of too worn-out vehicles and other products that could really be hazardous to the environment?
Yeah, you know, we work for member states and guided by member states, including Tanzania, on the issues about sovereign policy issues. It's really for the government to put in place the regulatory framework.
You would advise?
As asked, we would advise. We would provide science-based data to help the policymakers make the decisions. But also we play the advocacy role, both from the supplier side, and, you know, since we are a member state global organization, we look at both the source but also the consumption as part of the sustainable production and consumption, including the clothes that we wear. You know, now there's a growing industry of green clothing. You know, so we would advise. Again, I'm about to have conversations with different ministers and heads of government as part of my official visit here, and I look forward to hearing what are the challenges that the government is facing and how can we support them, and where we cannot support them, for example, can we catalyze action through our partnerships. If you look at the United Nations reforms where we are expected to work as one UN, it's also part of us looking at our brothers and sisters within the UN and to say, can this be done by another UN agency?
Okay.
So stay tuned. Maybe next time we will have very specific, concrete requests from the government.
Excellent. Maybe towards, towards the end of the program, I wish to understand, Joyce, from you. You're young, you're very energetic. We, as a country, are very proud. But maybe for my viewers who are watching right now the Monday Agenda, I would like to know a little bit about your journey and your achievements as well to date on such a high position.
Oh, wow. Look, I mean, I'm a very proud Tanzanian, happens to be a woman at the role that I am. But I really want to make a point which I make every place I go. I was raised, went to public school, national service in Tanzania when others might have said times were tough. And if there is one message, if I can do it, I think a lot of Tanzanians can come above my shoulders and be better. My journey has been somewhat unconventional, characterized by three things. One is absolute work ethic. And this I picked up from Tanzania, whether it's through Mafinga National Service or through Weruweru Secondary School. And the people who empowered me here, they built the foundations that shaped who I've become, work ethic. The second is taking informed risks. One of the mantra, which I also tell my children, is do not do the easy things. I tend to go for things that make me uncomfortable. What does it mean? I crossed over, I went to the World Bank Group, I spent 21 years, now I'm in the UN. But even within the World Bank Group, for example, I chose to go to China, I chose to go to South Korea and competed for the position, not hand-delivered. So take informed risks, because one of the things I have learned, we as human beings, we have more in common than in difference. The third, which is equally important, I never forgotten where I've come from. So I'm very grounded, married to a wonderful man who is Tanzanian, and I have 2 kids who are teenagers. So the grounding, the value system still comes from my Tanzanian upbringing, and that's what keeps me going.
You were watching the Monday Agenda, and I was highly privileged to have with me Ms. Joyce Msuya, who is the Deputy Executive Director of United Nations Environment Program and an Assistant to the Secretary General. We spoke about the issues of environment, and my call is you're responsible for the better environment for the next generation. So let's join hands all together. Let's support the government. Let's support the UN, the entire UN system through the UNEP, and make sure that the world tomorrow remains the better place. Until then, thank you so much for coming to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Please keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great pleasure. Until next time, I'm your host, Austin Makani, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.